HOA enforcer punched my dad. Didn't know he trained UFC fighters. Some things you expect to happen when you move into a new neighborhood. Nosy neighbors, chatty mailmen, maybe the occasional barking dog. What you don't expect is to watch your retired father get sucker punched in your front yard over a mailbox, especially when the guy doing the punching claims to be enforcing HOA policy. We'd lived in Stonebrook Estates less than 2 weeks. My wife Emily and I had just had our first baby, and my father Daniel Reyes moved in with us for a while to help around the house. The man's built like a tree stump, weathered from years of training fighters. Ex-Marine turned MMA coach. He walks slow now, but when he moves, it's deliberate. That afternoon, he was outside repairing the mailbox, one of those steel ones mounted on a wooden beam. The base had cracked in the move, and he wanted to reinforce it. That's when the guy showed up. Cargo pants, Oakleys, shiny badge on a lanyard that read Stonebrook HOA Enforcer. No one had ever heard of that role. "Sir," he barked, "that mailbox violates HOA standards. Remove it immediately." My dad didn't even look up. "Mailbox has been there since '04, he said. "Just reinforcing it. The post must be decorative. Cedar or maple only. You're in violation." Dad wiped his brow. "It's my property." "Man, step back." That's when Clipboard Man lost it. "I'm issuing a fine. If it's not gone by tonight, I'll remove it myself." I had just stepped onto the porch when I saw it happen. The man reached out and kicked the base of the mailbox. "Back off," my dad warned, standing. The guy shoved him, and my father did what he hadn't done in 20 years. He punched him. Not just any punch, a clean jab cross combo, fluid, tactical. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes. Silence fell across the cul-de-sac. Even the wind stopped. I ran out. "Dad!" He raised his hands and stepped back. I warned him. Neighbors started coming out. Phones came out. Somebody gasped, "Is that blood?" The guy groaned on the grass. A phone buzzed. Someone yelled, "Call an ambulance." Dad turned to me, calm as ever. I told him not to touch my mailbox. Police arrived, and that's when Karen stepped onto the scene. Tennis skirt, visor, clipboard. Oh my God, he assaulted a compliance officer. He should be arrested immediately. I stepped in. He's not a compliance officer. He's not even HOA. There's no record of any HOA enforcer position. Karen froze, but I wasn't done. "And that man he hit," I said, nodding at my father. "That's Daniel Reyes, former Marine, 3-time North American MMA champion. He trained half the guys in the octagon." Gasps. Karen's face drained of color. She looked like she wanted to disappear, but she didn't. She lawyered up, filed a restraining order against my dad, claimed the mailbox was a weapon, and the punch was premeditated violence against a registered HOA officer. There was just one problem. There was no registered HOA, at least, not legally. And the rabbit hole we were about to go down, it ran deeper than we ever imagined. I grew up watching my dad teach fighters how to keep their heads cool while their jaws got rocked. He always said the worst mistake wasn't getting hit. It was swinging back without knowing what you were swinging into. Now I understood what he meant, because the more I dug into what happened in our front yard, the more I realized this wasn't a case of a hothead with a fake badge. This was a scheme, and Karen was at the center of it. The morning after the punch, I walked down to the Stonebrook HOA office, which turned out to be a rented storage unit 2 miles off-site. The address was listed on one of Karen's flyers. I found it padlocked, no signage, no posted hours, just a mailbox duct-taped with a handwritten label. Stonebrook HOA Compliance Division. I called the county zoning board. Stonebrook didn't have an active HOA charter. Dissolved 6 years ago when the original developer went bankrupt. That meant Karen and her so-called enforcers had been operating under no legal authority, yet they were handing out fines, threatening homeowners, and now pressing charges for assault. At noon, my dad received a citation, not from the police, from Karen, hand-delivered, signed Officer R. Matson, Field Enforcement Unit, Stonebrook HOA. That's the guy he dropped in the yard. Attached was a $1 $200 property violation fee and a written demand for anger management training or eviction review. Dad looked at the paper, scoffed, and slid it across the table. Is this a joke? It's turning into one, I said. But I wasn't laughing. I was building a case. First stop, the town clerk's office. I filed a FOIA request for any active HOA documentation tied to Stonebrook Estates. Nothing. No officers. No board meetings. No tax ID. What I did find, tucked in the back of a permit folder, was a 2017 dissolution notice signed by a notary. Karen's name wasn't on anything, but her husband's name was Robert Matson, the same name on the badge, same guy who got laid out on my lawn. They weren't enforcing policy. They were playing cop. I brought everything to the local PD. At first, they said they had to stay neutral. It was being treated as a civil matter. But when I showed them the badge Robert used, the forged signature line, and the HOA seal he'd printed from Google Images, things changed. That's impersonation of an official, one officer muttered. Third degree of proven. And he struck the mailbox first. I added, my dad just defended himself. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't backing down. She held a backyard emergency HOA session, complete with folding chairs, a projector screen, and a PowerPoint titled Restoring Order in Stonebrook, How We Enforce Without Fear. She called my dad a known aggressor, called me entitled, even said we brought crime and instability to a once pristine neighborhood. She didn't know we were recording. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Hendricks, sent us a full video file, along with a whispered apology. I never liked her, she said, but I was scared to speak up. Karen's little empire started to crack. Turns out, over 30 homes had received fake citations since the beginning of the year. Most people paid them quietly, in cash, out of fear. She threatened elderly couples with lien placement, claimed she had legal right to inspect yards, gardens, even driveways. And Robert, he wasn't just Karen's husband. He was also on probation from an altercation in another HOA community 2 counties over. By week's end, we had what we needed. False badge check, forged citation check, illegally collected fines $940 documented, video footage of Karen slandering residents at a public meeting double check. All I needed now was a platform, so I made one. I set up a town-wide neighborhood meeting, not just Stonebrook, but surrounding communities too. We invited the media. I called in a favor from a buddy who works for the county housing authority, and I asked my dad reluctantly if he'd speak. He said no at first, but when he saw Clara, my daughter, watching him from the steps, he changed his mind. That Sunday, over 120 people showed up at the community rec center. Karen tried to crash it, tried to take the mic, but this time no one handed it to her. My dad stepped up first, wore a clean polo, calm, grounded. He didn't brag. He didn't threaten. He just told the truth. I served this country. I've trained warriors. And I didn't come to this neighborhood looking for trouble. But I won't let someone raise their fist to me and call it a policy. People applauded. Even the police liaison nodded. And that's when I walked to the podium, held up Karen's fake citation, and said this was printed on stolen trust. Sometimes you don't realize how many people were hurting until someone finally says it out loud. After my dad's speech at the community meeting and my presentation of the fake citations, it was like a dam broke. Neighbors who had stayed silent for months or even years finally spoke up. Mrs. Callahan, who lived 2 houses down, stood up and said Karen threatened to tow her car because it had dirt on the tires. Mr. Singh said Karen made him replant his entire garden after claiming it violated the community's aesthetic balance. A single mom in the back of the room teared up as she explained how Robert Matson, Karen's husband, had threatened to report her to the city for hanging laundry on her back deck, and now they all knew none of it had ever been legal. The next morning, the media picked it up. Local Channel 8 ran a story titled Fake HOA Enforcer Exposed Neighborhood in Uproar Over False Fines and Assault. It featured clips from our community meeting. Photos of the fake badge, a still of my dad's calm, unwavering face as he told his story. It went viral. By noon, Karen and Robert's names were trending on the local Facebook watch groups. By dinner time, Channel 5 had picked up the story statewide. By 9 p.m., the county prosecutor announced they were opening a criminal investigation into fraud, impersonation, and assault. I woke up Tuesday morning to find 3 police cruisers parked outside Karen's house. Robert Matson was handcuffed and placed into the back of one of them, head down, lips pressed tight. Karen stood on the porch, ranting at the officers, screaming that we were liars, that this was mob rule, that she was protecting property values. Then she saw the cameras, and for the first time, she stopped talking. The fallout came fast. Over the next 48 hours, all fines Karen and Robert had collected were ordered to be repaid. They were charged with impersonating public officials, filing false claims, and misdemeanor fraud. The town issued a formal declaration voiding every fake citation they ever wrote. And every homeowner who had paid fines got a refund plus damages. Karen was banned from leading or organizing any community-based group. Robert was facing probation violation and likely jail time. But the damage wasn't just legal, it was emotional. Because what Karen had created wasn't just a fake HOA, it was a climate of fear, of silence, of division. And for years, people let it fester because they thought no one would believe them. Because standing up alone felt impossible. Until someone did. Until my dad stood up and took a punch, then gave one back. A week after the arrest, I was walking my daughter down to the community playground when a man I'd never met called out from his porch, "You're the guy from the meeting." "Right." "Yeah." I nodded. He gave a thumbs up. Glad someone finally cracked that clipboard. Later that evening, the same neighbor showed up with a bottle of iced tea and a box of donuts. Said he was sorry he hadn't spoken up sooner. One by one, neighbors started rebuilding trust. A new resident asked if we could start a real neighborhood committee, not a rulemaking board, but a volunteer-based group to help clean up, watch over each other, and celebrate birthdays and block parties. We all agreed. No clipboards, no fines, no fear, just neighbors. But there was one thing left to settle. The case Karen filed against my dad, the one accusing him of assault. Despite all that happened, the court still had to process it. Even though Robert had struck first, even though the whole thing was caught on multiple angles, and even though he'd impersonated an official, the court date remained. Dad could have been fined, could have had it on his record, but he never blinked. The trial lasted 27 minutes. The judge watched the footage, read the documentation, heard the testimonies, and dismissed the charges. He looked my father in the eye and said, "Sir," in my courtroom, "what you did is called self-defense." And with that, it was over. As we walked out into the sunlight, a few neighbors clapped. Dad just shook his head and muttered, "I'm too old for this." But I could see the pride in his eyes. Not because he won, but because he protected something worth fighting for. The thing about fear is it lingers. Long after the danger's gone, long after the cameras stop filming and the headlines fade. For a while, our street felt like it was holding its breath. No one wanted to admit it, but the truth was plain. We'd been living under a lie, a fake HOA, fake rules, fake power, and we'd all let it happen. Some through fear, some through silence, and some, if we're being honest, through convenience. But now, it was time to rebuild. It started with one small sign. 2 days after the court dropped all charges against my dad, Ms. Callahan, the same neighbor Karen once threatened over dirty tires, walked out with a handmade wooden plaque. It was barely a foot wide, painted green with shaky white lettering. "Neighbors, not enforcers." She planted it right next to her rose bushes. By that afternoon, 3 more signs had gone up on the block. "Kindness beats compliance." "We don't fine, we help." "Welcome, whoever you are." No more clipboards, no more citations, just fences repainted, porches swept, and conversations happening face to face for the first time in years. And then came the mailboxes. "You see, My dad's mailbox, the one Robert kicked, had been replaced by a temporary post. Nothing fancy, just a wooden beam and a new box from Home Depot. But on a Sunday morning, I walked outside and found my neighbor standing at the edge of our lawn with tools in hand. Drills, a paint, even a pressure washer. Mr. Singh, the quiet man who once stayed silent when Karen fined his garden, stepped forward. "May we help you rebuild it?" he asked. I turned to my dad. He just smiled and nodded. "I'll hold the post." It took 2 hours. We painted it black with silver trim, mounted it in concrete. Clara brought out lemonade. Even the kids pitched in, painting little handprints around the base. We didn't just build a mailbox. We reclaimed the ground it stood on. Soon after, we officially voted to form the Stonebrook Neighborhood Circle, not an HOA, but a voluntary coalition. No fines, no citations, just shared commitments. Every third Saturday a cleanup day. Every season a block potluck. Every new neighbor a welcome basket with cookies and real contact info. Dad even offered to host free self-defense classes in the community center. The first one had 22 people show up. One woman, a single mom, said she hadn't felt safe walking her dog since Karen told her to cover up or move out. Dad handed her a pair of gloves and said, "You don't have to shrink anymore." And as for me, I started writing. Not just complaints or petitions, but the whole story. From the moment we moved into the punch that shook the neighborhood awake, I sent it to a local blog. They published it. Then a regional news site picked it up. Before long, my inbox was full of messages from people all over the country. This happened to us, too. My HOA president threatened my kids for sidewalk chalk. We finally took our neighborhood back. It hit me then, this wasn't just about Stonebrook. It was about a pattern of power abused, of silence mistaken for consent, of rules used to push people out. And maybe, just maybe, we had cracked that pattern wide open. But not everyone was happy about the changes. There were still a few holdouts, people who missed the order, who liked the fines, the uniformity. They said the block looked messier now. One woman even complained that the wrong kind of people would feel welcome. We told her, politely, that was the point. She didn't wave after that. But no one stopped her from hanging lights at Christmas, because we weren't going to become her. A month later, I was walking Lila to the park when she looked up at me and asked, "Did Grandpa win?" It caught me off guard. I thought about it, about everything we gained and everything we lost. "Yeah," I said finally, "but not just with his fists." She smiled. "He's strong." I nodded. He used his strength for something bigger. That night, I sat on the porch with Dad. We watched the sun go down behind the rooftops. "I never wanted to throw that punch," he said suddenly. "I know," I said. He turned to me, "But I'm glad I did." Then he paused. Not because I hurt him, but because that punch woke people up. And he was right, because sometimes you don't rebuild by starting fresh. You rebuild by standing up, calling it out, and daring to do better. Together. The mailbox still stands. Not because it's the strongest one on the block, or the fanciest, or even the straightest one of the kids painted a purple dinosaur on the side, and we never corrected it, but it stands because we put it there, together, after the storm, and at its base, those little handprints remain, red, green, blue, yellow. One of them's Lila's, the smallest one. She was the reason my dad stepped in front of that HOA enforcer in the first place. Not for himself, but to show her what it meant to protect what's right. And now, every time I walk by that post, I remember what it cost and what it gave us back. Karen never came back to Stonebrook. After the charges were filed, she quietly sold the house. No open house, no moving truck, just a for sale sign that vanished overnight. Word spread that she and Robert had relocated to a retirement town 3 counties over. We didn't throw a party. No one cheered. We just moved on, because this story was never really about her. It was about what she represented. The abuse of power hidden behind procedure, the quiet pressure to conform, the danger of silence dressed as civility, and the choice every neighborhood has to make when someone like her tries to seize control, not with votes or consensus, but with fear. Months later, a new couple moved into Karen's house. Two dads and a toddler named Eva. Their front lawn became a toy zone within days. Bikes, sidewalk chalk, water balloons. At first, they kept to themselves, probably worried they'd be judged like we once were. But one night, Clara made extra chili and sent Lila over with a container and a note that read, "Welcome to the street. We don't do clipboards here." The next night, they brought over fresh cornbread, and a week later, their mailbox was repainted to match ours, handprints and all. We still hold community nights. Not mandatory. No sign-up sheet. No fines. Just a long folding table, lawn chairs, potluck dishes, and laughter. We talk about gardens, weather, kids, and if it'll finally snow this year, nobody brings a rule book. Nobody asks who's in charge, because we all are, together. Dad doesn't say much at these gatherings. He usually sits at the edge, sipping lemonade, watching the kids run circles around that post with the dinosaur. But once, I caught him standing alone by it, brushing his hand over one of the faded prints. I stepped up beside him and asked what he was thinking. He said, "I was just wondering if they'll remember." Who he smiled. The kids, when they're older, if they'll remember why it matters. I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because I already knew they would. The mailbox isn't about the punch. It's about the moment that punch made possible. The moment when a quiet neighborhood stopped whispering, stood up, and said enough. The moment when silence lost and community won. Have you ever witnessed power being used to intimidate instead of protect? Have you ever stood up, even when you didn't have to because you knew someone needed to? We want to hear from you. Drop your story, share your moment. Let's talk about strength, not just in fists, but in voice, in truth, in unity. Because the next time someone tries to knock you down with rules they made up, remember this: you're not alone, and your handprint matters.